We have Kendra. Dr. Kendra is with us, and we're going to be speaking on postcolonial and ecocritical perspectives in the Legion's land. So let's just bow our heads. Gracious Father, we thank you again for this day. We pray that you be with Kendra, that you will guide, director. We're thankful that we can gather here today. We pray in your name. Amen.
Happy Sabbath. It's good to see you today, and I wanted to just announce that handouts from the previous weeks are available on that little table, and of course today's handout is in its normal spot there as you
Did anybody not get that?
so they'll handouts, yes, that's great. We're going to read another, what I think is another challenging story. I admitted to you last Sabbath that the story of the Syrophoenician woman is one of those stories that when I first began teaching, I actually skipped it because I didn't know what to do with this difficult story in Mark's Gospel. This is another of those stories that raises lots of questions. And what I would like to do with you as we read it from the handout and look at this story, remind ourselves of the details of the story, what I'd love for you to do is, again, I left some space at the bottom of the page. If you want to, as we're reading, either underline or mark up or put a question mark or a comment or an exclamation point or however you are responding to this story, questions that are raised for you by this particular story. And then we will jump into it and I'll be sharing some of what it means to look at this from the perspective of ecocritical perspectives and postcolonial perspectives. But let's first read the text. Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. You might recall that some of the details of the story are there or not there because you're remembering Matthew's version of it. But I'd like us to stay with Mark's this morning. They came to the other side of the sea, this is the Sea of Galilee, to the land of the Gerasenes. And when he, that is Jesus, had come out of the boat, immediately out of the tombs, there met him a man with an unclean spirit, who lived in the tombs, and no one and nothing could no longer bind him, not even with a chain. It's very dramatic in the Greek there. For often he had been bound with shackles and with chains, but he had been able to wrench apart the chains, and he had crushed the shackles, and no one was strong enough to restrain him. Through every night and day in the tombs and in the mountains, he was crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down to worship him. Crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of God the Most High? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." He asked him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "Legion is my name, for we are many." He repeatedly begged him that he not send them out of the land. Now there was on the mountain a large herd of pigs feeding. They begged him, saying, "Send us into the pigs so that we might enter them." And he dismissed them. And going out, the unclean spirits entered into the pigs, and the herd, about 2,000, charged down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The ones who grazed them fled and reported in the city and in the country, and they came to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus, and they saw the demon-possessed man sitting, clothed and in a right mind, the one who had had the legion, and they were afraid. The ones who had seen described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and concerning the pigs, and they began to beg him to go away from their domain. And as he was getting into the boat, the demon-possessed man begged him that he might be with him. He did not allow him, but said to him, "Go away to your home, to your people, and report to them all that the Lord has done, how he has shown mercy to you." And he departed and began to proclaim in the Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. What struck you? We'll have a few moments of response here, then I'll share some more, and then we'll have more conversation toward the end. But I just would love to hear from you what you noticed. What jumped out? Please, Judy.
The hopelessness of the plight of the man and the people that didn't know what to do with him.
Very interesting observations. The hopelessness of the plight of the man and the other people that didn't know what to do with him. Okay? There are commentaries that say this is the most wretched person we meet in all of the Gospels because of his situation. Thank you so much. Please, Roger.
It looks like this is the first factory farm.
Interesting. Oh, we're going to have to come back to that.
2,000 head of hogs, that's a lot of pigs.
Okay, please hear what Roger's saying. That is something that many of us who come to this text don't notice, aren't alerted to, but I think first century readers would have been. Very interesting. 2,000 pigs is a lot of pigs. Thank you so much. Ron.
Why do the demons drive the pigs to their death? And the man strengthens the man.
Have you ever wondered that question? Why do these demons seem to commit suicide? Right? Well, they get what they want, not to be taken out of the country entirely, and then they run off the side of a cliff. What's with that? What's going on with that? I saw Jeff and then in the back there.
Well, related to that, the demons don't seem to have an independent existence unless they're inhabiting something.
Very interesting, isn't it? They have to be somewhere, in something. What's going on with that?
Somebody, rather.
Somebody or something, right? Interesting. Thank you so much for that observation. Please.
I'm just wondering, which hymn did they beg to go away?
Oh, okay. I think, I could be wrong about this, but I believe it's pretty clear that it's talking about Jesus. Begging Jesus, but maybe Leo's going to correct me on that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Jesus, because it's very interesting. First, they beg to not go away, and now the same word, same root word, is begging. The townspeople are now begging that Jesus go away. Yeah. Please, Leo.
So what's up with Jesus, who seems to be so cavalier about the economic well-being of these Gentiles?
Yes! You've had that question, right? What is going on here in this story? And because I don't see another hand right now, I'll also add to that same point, some of my friends who are very much advocates of non-human life, believing that all living creatures are God's creatures. How do you have a God, a creator God, who just destroys 2,000 pigs? Not to mention that this is the livelihood of the community, right? So yeah, oh, that brought up more hands. Go ahead, I saw you first, Judy, and then your
The
husband.
last few words of Jonah. God notices the animals that were
Even
up
the
for inspection
animals.
in Nineveh.
Am I not to be concerned about that great city?
Now the animals.
So this is a problematic story, isn't it? Gerald, please. And then we'll get two more.
Well, just on that point, comparative, is a man worth less than 2,000 pigs, or in the eyes of the people, or?
That's an interesting.
And
You're already making a sermon out of this, I can tell. No, but I mean, that's a question, right? Well, a value, and so we need to wrestle with this. We need to be honest about these questions. Follow up, please.
But another thing I was thinking is, there seems to be the people, a lot of fear here.
Yes.
The people are afraid.
A lot of fear in this scene, isn't it? Before Jesus gets there, while Jesus is there, and even after Jesus has performed this miracle, there's a lot of fear. I'm glad you noticed that. Thank you so much. Roger and then Jan.
I don't know why Jesus answers the begging of the demon.
Thank you for saying that. Why does Jesus actually negotiate? Is Jesus negotiating with these demons? Well, thank you for raising us another item that's problematic. Jan, please.
Well, I just wanted a couple things. The pigs, I think the demons wanted to go into the pigs. They may not have foresaw that the pigs were going to go down that steep incline. Yeah, it's possible. The pigs reacted to the demons in a way that wasn't expected by the demons. The other thing I wanted to most importantly point out is the freedom that I see that Jesus gave. He gave the demons the freedom. They asked permission to go to the pigs. He let them do that. Kind of like he gave them leave in the ethics commentary. And then
We're going to talk about that word in a minute.
At the end, the people asked Jesus to leave. Here he'd done this wonderful thing. He gave them freedom. He didn't impose himself on them.
Okay. Lots of important insights. Thank you. Please, sir.
I wonder about the significance of the tombs in here, all the spirits
Okay.
that we have
All right. Good. One person will say this idea that this is an unclean man with unclean spirits living in tombs, that is, unclean places in an unclean, i.e. Gentile land with 2,000 unclean pigs nearby. Nothing about this story is kosher. That's Lamar Williamson, by the way. Kelly, please.
I find it curious where Jesus asks him what his name is. And I wonder, is Jesus asking what is the name of the individual? Or is Jesus asking what is the name of these demons?
Good. And one of the interesting things about this story is in much of the Gospel of Mark, you will have demons identifying Jesus. But here it's switched. Jesus is saying, what's your name? Jesus kind of turns the table, if you will. A couple more hands. I saw one here, please, sir. And then-
Just the use of the word dismiss.
Yes.
He dismissed them. It doesn't say that he sent them into the pigs.
Okay. And again, something we need to talk about that word in a minute. Maybe John's going to help us with it right now. Don't get to my punchline first, John, please. No, go for it.
I wouldn't dream of it. Picking up on what we had a second ago, though, we were looking at the topography and the focalization, the intensification of impurities and all that.
Yes.
This ain't kosher. That's right.
No.
The way the dynamic of pure and impure, clean and unclean, pure and contamination worked in those days was when the unclean came in contact with the clean, the unclean, can I say Trump?
No, but go ahead.
One out. We have a case, now that this man is clothed and in his right mind, he wants to leave the area.
Yeah.
The demons say, don't drive us out of this area, this is our turf. Interesting, Jesus says to the man, nah, you stay here, and let the purity of what you've just been through spread its influence across the unclean and impure. And I won't go on because I don't want to step on
No, that's great. Thank you so much. That's really powerful. Thank you for that. So, Judy, last one. I don't see another hand. So
I really am interested in the demons identifying Jesus as the Son of the living God in all of this.
Yeah.
You know, considering the great controversy, the devil knows who's around. I mean, he recognizes Jesus.
And
the
that
devils
happens.
Believe and tremble.
And the demonic forces throughout the Gospel of Mark are doing that. Yeah, that's not unusual for this story. Thank you so much. These are great insights, great observations, great questions, great things that disturb us, to put them out there and to be honest about them. This series has used the metaphor of a kaleidoscope as different ways of, when we turn it, we look at it from a slightly different angle, we notice new things. And so today what I'd like us to think about is what happens if we read Mark with an eye to creation, to nature, to land, to non-human life. What if we actually made that the lens that we're going to focus in on and ask those questions and notice those kinds of things? We have a great tradition in the Seventh-day Adventist Church about caring about God's creation. So what would happen if we did what some of our colleagues who are doing secular literary criticism, when they're looking at eco-critical questions, what would happen if we applied that eco-critical lens, that approach, that perspective to reading this story? What would happen? What would we notice? And then, like we started to introduce last week, what if we also took seriously a lens with an eye to noticing post-colonial questions or perspectives or issues? That is, with an eye to how colonial violence threatens ecological sustainability. Is it possible that those two lenses or those two perspectives can help us better read and notice new things about this story? So that's what I would like us to think about today. When some of my friends who are very much concerned about all of creation, all of life, including non-human life, when they read this story and find it so problematic, I took those questions to some commentaries. What to do with that? And there was actually one commentary that said that's an inappropriate question. That was the connotation. Because the real point of this story, and I've put it on the handout on the second page, Robert, I think his name is pronounced Ulick, it says that the story of the deliverance of a man, an unclean man, becomes the story of the deliverance of an unclean land because Jesus gets rid of all these dirty pigs. And I just found that not sufficient for an answer for me. And so that's what sent me down this path that I'd like to share with you. You can see on the handout that I have two categories here. The land, the Greek word is kora, of the land of the Gerasenes as hazardous land, and we're also going to talk about it as occupied land. So I'm just going to run here for a few minutes, and then I have some questions, and I want to hear your reactions to some of these ideas and insights. The land of the Gerasenes as hazardous land, first of all. We've already noted some of these from the perspective of Jewish people. This was Gentile land. This was dirty land. This was on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. That idea of it not being kosher at all. The Sea of Galilee was a natural barrier between the primarily Jewish villages on the west side and the primarily Gentile, mostly Hellenistic cities there on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. So in that sense, they would have thought of that as unclean land. But one of the things that was interesting about that word Korah, that word, I'm becoming convinced that it's best understood as sort of fields or the territory away from the cities where people are grazing animals or having fields of crops. So it's sort of, there's that connotation to it as well. And the idea that all of that territory on the other side, from a Jewish perspective, would be unclean. But I would also suggest, and John was hinting at this, that I think even Gentiles would look at this place as unclean at some level. Because, and I'm getting at this idea with the help of Mary Douglas's work, that anytime something is out of place, that is also a way of thinking about it in terms of what is unclean. And Legion is out of place. He's acting like an animal. Humans shouldn't act like that. So I think even from a Gentile perspective, this is unclean territory. This is scary space. This would make you nervous if you're reading this story as a Gentile as well as for a Jew. From a Gentile's perspective, this is a dangerous land. That idea that no one no longer could contain this man. That repetition, no one and nothing could no longer bind him, not even with a chain. Just underscoring how bad this place really is, especially with this man named Legion. Taking a first century perspective, and here we're getting back to some of Roger's insights, that first century perspective, what did people think of when they saw a land where 2,000 pigs were? Now, I think maybe our tendency might be, this is an idyllic kind of they're grazing and this is, but actually that is not the reaction of a first century reader. 2,000 pigs grazing, no. A herd that large was actually hazardous, not idyllic. This was a hazardous scene. Why? Why does this underscore the idea of this hazardous land? When you see that many pigs, you immediately know that there has been a shift in the economy of these people from allocation to extraction. And let me just briefly describe this. There's a wonderful book by a man named Roland Bohr who talks about the sacred economy of ancient Israel and goes into this in depth. But this idea of going from an allocation society where people get from the land what they need, they do not take a surplus. There are communities of about 75 to 150 people. Everyone takes what they need. There's not any need for surplus. You don't sort of drain the land of its resources. But an extraction economy is one in which somebody's a ruler of the territory. And that ruler doesn't work the land. And that ruler expects to be fed. So suddenly you have to have surplus in order to feed the rulers, the elite. And this is where immediately, as soon as you see 2,000 pigs, you realize there's some serious power play going on here with somebody in charge, some bodies in charge, a lot of them. And they are demanding these pigs be raised instead of using the land to feed people. And as soon as you saw 2,000 pigs, you knew that this was the the poorest use of that land resource that you could imagine. Why? Because pigs were a luxury meat. They didn't provide anything else. It's not like sheep, where you would have the ability to use the wool for something. They don't provide anything other than luxury meat, and they take an enormous amount of water and land resources. So the fact that you see 2,000 pigs on that hillside, you know that there are people starving to death. Probably even communities who had to move on. I may be reading too much of it at this point, but I even wonder if Legion is the one-man welcoming committee to Jesus as Jesus arrives on the shore, because most of the people have had to flee, have had to leave. And he's left with the memories of the horror that he has witnessed as people in power have taken over the land. Let me read you a couple of things from Roland Bohr, and also I'm very indebted to a book by Marvin Harris. It's clear that these elite landowners who have taken over the land value luxury animal husbandry over the public health of the farmers in the region. Pigs, while providing good quality meat, had the disadvantages of they fare ill under temperature extremes. They require high levels of water. They don't provide fiber or milk, but they're only for human consumption. The Israelite prohibition against eating pigs was sound ecological strategy. Pork was an ecological and economic luxury, says Harris. The land was no longer being able used for human consumption, but instead it was this taking over of the land for the pigs. Rather than the optimal engagement with nature of allocation economies, preferring animals that have minimal impact on their environment, maximal engagement with nature is the mode of operation for extraction economies, along with animals which suck up water and fodder as though they were nothing. That's a quote from Lord. So it seems that if we read the Gospel of Mark chapter 5 with the eyes of a first century reader aware of common agricultural practices, we would be astonished at any pig husbandry, much less a large herd like this. We quickly surmise that it is a huge excess of luxury animals unsuited for the environment and an inefficient use of valuable resources. Some coercive power must be behind this agricultural decision. Who was responsible for this economic and environmental disaster? And here's where I want to move into the second part, which is the land, Korah, as occupied land. You're already catching where I'm going, but I just want to share a couple minutes. But I saw Forrest, you share with us, and then I'll...
How would you differentiate this from North Africa, which used extensive areas for wheat raising? The Roman Empire had huge cities that depended on farms out in the way outside. So couldn't this have been a very legitimate use of land that fed the large cities?
I'm going to suggest in a moment that it's not feeding the large cities because of this being luxury meat, that it's instead feeding the invaded armies. And I'll share with you why in just a moment. But I think that it's not, you're not maximizing who you're feeding. You're actually minimizing who you're feeding with this particular picture in mind. And so, again, I'm just suggesting that this will give us another angle at which to read this story. So let me just share a couple of ideas from mostly Josephus here about what I think Marc is doing by the words that he's choosing. Look with me again at the passage, and as we go through, I'm going to note a few things, especially starting in around verse 10. There's going to be some very interesting words to notice here. That idea of they begged him not to send them out of the land. The Romans did not want to leave this land. Why? This was the buffer of the eastern frontier of the Roman army. We know that this is where many legions of military were set up along this area on the east side, just on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. The Decapolis was that eastern frontier. Roman troops were located in this region to eliminate any insurrections against their colonial power. Gadara, one of the possible locations for this Mark story, fell to the Roman military leader Vespasian in 67 or 68. If you'll remember, the second week we were together, we were talking about a view of when and where this gospel was located. And we were looking at a view by John Donahue and placing it in Rome, and Joel Marcus placing it around this location and this time period. Very interesting. It was 67, 68 when Vespasian came through this area. He ordered that all the youth be killed by the sword and the villages around Gadara burned. So this had happened in recent memory. In another account that occurs during these same years and not far from Gadara, another slaughter of local villagers by Rome is described. And Josephus says that Placidus, one of Vespasian's generals, instigates a revenge killing that leaves thousands drowned in the Jordan River. Josephus concludes the episode by saying that the Jordan River could not be passed over by reason of the dead bodies that were in it. That's this region. But the region would see still further slaughter. In Gerasa, another city of the Decapolis, and also a potential location for this story, Vespasian set up a fortification after killing 1,000 young men of the region, plundering their families and setting fire to their villages. The word legion itself is a Latin word brought into the Greek and now English, and it had only one meaning in Mark's social world, and it was a division of Roman soldiers. It seems that this struggle that's being described here in this story is a struggle against Roman imperial rule, or at least there's that potential reading. Connections between the legion of Roman soldiers and the pigs not only include the fact that pork was the most popular meat among the Roman soldiers, but it was also a type of mascot for the Roman soldiers. Caesar's 10th Legion had, among other things, the image of a boar on its standards. Gil and I have actually seen this in the museum just outside, in Jerusalem, where we were able to take pictures of this, the image of a boar on their standards. An additional textual clue here, if you look back at the text, the word that is used for a herd of pigs at the end of verse 11, that is not actually a word used in the first century for a group of pigs. If you were talking about a herd of pigs, you would not use that word. But it is used to describe a band of military recruits. Isn't that interesting? Also, and several of you caught this, I remember Jan caught this, the verb translated as he dismissed them is a military command. He dismissed the pigs, military language. The word describing the pigs charging into the sea was a way to describe military forces going into battle. They're going and charging. And that discussion of the sea, is that a reminder of how the Romans had come into their territory by crossing the Mediterranean Sea? Is it an allusion to Placidus drowning thousands of local fighters so that the Jordan could not be passed over for the dead bodies in it? Perhaps Mark is even drawing on a story with Pharaoh's army is defeated and horse and rider is thrown into the sea. Maybe that's an echo that's going on as well. The pleading of the demons that Jesus not send them out of the land, several of you caught this idea, is also the pleading that they do with Jesus to leave the land. Again, reminding us that the Romans didn't want to leave this territory. The very name of the city, Gerasa, means to drive away or to banish. Is this story primarily about a legion of demons being banished, or is it imagining the Roman legion driven away? If Mark's gospel is only about spiritual healing, why would the author so blatantly associate the two? And what are we supposed to get from that, if indeed that's what's happening? There is some work being done on this story using some of Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth insights, and talking about how oppressed people begin to have a madness from years of oppression. That there's a madness that comes from oppression, and wondering if indeed this whole story, in part at least, is a symbolic portrait of how Roman imperialism was destroying the hearts and the minds of the colonized people. This madness caused by oppression. Is possession here not only spiritual but also political possession that we're witnessing? Is it really only about spiritual unclean spirits, or is it the whole colonial system of oppression that's being challenged? There are other things that people are wondering about too, that idea of, is he going mad because he's representing the restless dead that have been slaughtered by the Romans? And so that Legion is kind of embodying all the people he's seen destroyed by Rome. And now territory that's really not habitable by his own people because of the ecological decisions that are being made. And is he sort of protesting the only way that he's able to, screaming and yelling like a madman, and embodying Legion by even calling, this is my name, but really he's embodying those who were the oppressors and are the oppressors? Is this part of this story? And are the people that come to the tomb and see him there in his right mind, are these people collaborators with Rome? Are they the owners of the pigs that are making money from it? Are they the few that are left that are being propped up by Rome? And is their fear partly because maybe they're now the most vulnerable to Rome's anger if somehow they've not protected the pigs? Is that one of the reasons they're terrified? Or is it that they've been exposed by Jesus' action? Jesus' healing of Legion challenges Rome's power struggle so that the whole system is in jeopardy. Legion was created because of this oppressive system. He was kept in the tombs with the howling animals. His protest in that case was sort of kept in check. But what do you do when this man is restored? When his voice is given back to him as a sane voice? How to keep him separate from society now? And Jesus becomes this terrible threat to those who have adjusted to and benefited from the occupation. As many have noted, this is the first time in Mark's gospel that Jesus walks on Gentile land. The second time will be the story we looked at last week. But this is the first time he walks on Gentile land. Marc redefines the unclean land of the Gerasenes, not with racial boundaries, but with the ecological descriptions of unsustainability. Jesus challenges that the oppression of Gentile people in the same way he has challenged the oppression of Jewish people by this Roman invading army. Gerasa is a place for people again by the end of the story, not just a place for pigs and a raving madman. Let me just conclude a couple of things and then ask you a question. Returning to that phrase from the commentary that I put on your handout, the story of the deliverance of a man becomes the story of a deliverance of a land. What for me was previously unacceptable or insufficient, now looking at it with new eyes, I love it, right? It becomes the deliverance of a whole land, a whole people, a whole group of people. All that means, not just because the pigs aren't there because, oh, those were unclean characters and we need to clean this up from a Jewish perspective, but now it is the deliverance of a land and all its people can now come back. If you can use the fields again for raising food and not just pigs. His liberation means that other women and men, children, and other animals will live. From an ecological and post-colonial perspective, Mark 5, 1-20 can be read as reimagining the land of Gerasa without pigs and without invading demonic armies controlling the local economy and ecology. Such reimagining means liberation for Legion, who's finally able to return home. So some of the things that I saw with the help of many other people as I was looking at the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, verses 1-20, with an eye to creation questions and with an eye to post-colonial questions, perspectives. So here's my question to you, and I'm happy to go any direction you'd like to go with comments or observations that you'd like to add, but what is your reaction to ecological perspectives or post-colonial perspectives? Could you see the potential for other passages of Scripture? Are you drawn to this? Are you what's a nice way of saying repelled? Are you, is this problematic? Should we be cautious with it? Just reactions to it. What is your reaction to these lenses? Gerald, I saw your hand first up.
I like this deliverance of the land, because if you go to chapter 6, Jesus comes back to this area, and it says the people even recognized him immediately.
Isn't that fascinating?
And he goes through all the towns, the farms, the villages, and the people take their sick to the marketplaces, and all were touched and were made well. I mean, this was a huge redemption of the people in the land.
Legion has shared the story, hasn't he? He's done what Jesus says for him to do at the end there. Please, and then we'll get here in the front. Oh, and Barbara in the back.
So, in addition to your 2 land descriptions, could we add the third one, that in the sight of Jesus, it was a land of redemptive potential?
Beautiful. Yeah.
And just like the Woodshot Gardens in Canada, I understand that it was an abandoned forest, and it was marvelously transformed.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Very much so. So the space of Jesus' ministry just keeps expanding, doesn't it? Please, sir, and then we'll go to Barbara.
As you described this, I'm interested in maybe seeing a similar situation here, what Jesus is doing here with what he did when he came in and cleansed the temple. That what he's doing, he's not just challenging how they're using the land or misusing the land. You know, we can focus on just that. He's challenging a whole system that includes how people and land interact or don't interact, and power relationships that are really, and whether it was the power relationships with the Jews he was going after in the temple, how the temple was being used for oppression, or in this case, how land is being misused to abuse people and land. He is challenging systems, not just innate, non-human things.
You would absolutely love a book by Herman Waitchen called The Reordering of Power. It's a commentary on the Gospel of Marc. You would love it. You have summarized his book beautifully in your comments. And it is on the handout that I gave you. That, and also a book by Ched Myers, Binding the Strong Man. Binding the Strong Man. You would love it. You've articulated so beautifully those 2 commentaries. Please, Barbara.
When you talk about the extraction economy of the Romans, I liken that to the analogous to our corporate farmers today and what they do to our land or air, how they pollute, how they use a lot of land for these cattle and pigs and chickens.
That only a few are going to benefit from.
And profit over people is disgraceful, and there's a great analogy here, which I appreciate you bringing out.
Oh, thank you for articulating that so well. Appreciate it. Roger, and also we've got Ron here and Peter for having him.
Well, there are 2 things that comes to my mind. The enclosure of Ireland, where they actually enclosed all of the land of small sheep herders and raisers and went into big corporate type structures, which actually brought on the potato famine, because the Irish, as I understand, the only way they could survive was through raising of potatoes. And then when the plague hit the potatoes, brought on the great famines. But it was primarily the enclosure of the land that took the land away from the small people to raise sheep. That's number one that's interesting to me. Second thing that's interesting to me is the disposal of the hogs that went into the sea. 2,000 hogs drowned in the sea. There's a lot of waste and a lot of disposal. And I just kind of equate that to today with all of the pollution that is being generated into the atmosphere, into the oceans, and all of the problems that it's creating today. It seems to me there's some kind of a parallel here.
No, thank you. These are very thoughtful insights, and you make me want to study more. Your comments make me want to study more. Ron, he might be able to do without the...
I can speak loud enough. Okay. I'm conjuring with this concept of a dangerous land, of second-class citizens, and I'm thinking about Puerto Rico. And you say we are in a post-colonial era, but there's a certain element of colonialism in our relationship to Puerto Rico. And of course, I think that our president is terrible because he almost doesn't realize that these are American citizens, and he blames them for the situation. But I realize that all of us, or should I say almost none of us, would have tolerated the situation in Puerto Rico today if that same situation had existed in Houston and in Florida for the same period of time. So we sort of feel like, well, you know, they were sort of backward and incapable anyway, so no, it's going to happen. So this attitude about a land or an area that is not as good as we are, or not inhabited by people that are not as white as we are, or, you know, whatever like that. And so this colonialism persists.
And one of the things that has become meaningful to me, if there's anything true about this reading, what becomes so powerful to me, Ron, is that Jesus says no in that land to that system. In his way, I mean, he's not going to, you know, have placards and say, you know, let's protest against Rome here. But he, in his way, in this story, is challenging that system. So that he returns to Jewish territory, and there are stories now about Jesus caring about Gentile land. And yes, he's going to go to the temple court, and he's going to challenge the oppression that's happening there too. But he's done that over in that foreign land. He's gone to Puerto Rico and done it there. I mean, what a wake-up call for the people hearing this story. Sorry, I'm so behind on how. Thank you so much. Please, Peter. I got in Josephus. Did you see that? That was for you, my friend.
Like history, like me. Listening to the way you are making the analysis of this story, I was thinking that the way you recommended to study, to read the Bible and to interpret it in your first presentation. In other words, you recommended that we have to look at the story, whatever the Bible in totality, behind, in, and beyond the text. And I think this is a typical example because you did all three of them today. Now, I'm thinking if Marc will be present here in the class, will he recognize this story?
It's good. It's a good question.
Because we made a lot of interpretation, I mean, going far beyond and behind, and it's really, I mean, it's amazing how many meanings we can find in every generation.
Isn't it fascinating?
Yes.
That's the analogy, right?
Right. Now, in regard to the story, in addition to what was mentioned here, what I was impressed the most in this story is the end of the story. I was impressed, very impressed by Jesus' words. When Jesus tells this man,
yes,
go and tell to your family and friends what God has done for you and how he had pity and mercy on you.
Beautiful. Thank you for reminding us of that. And we're going to conclude today on that point too. I want us to get
Laura here rather than walk over
We've
there.
got Laura, and we've got Judy. Oh, okay. You keep track for us. I'm
trying.
Real quick, I think Marc might better recognize the story because a lot of these things would have been known by the people at the time that we are ignorant of.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Jeff, yeah. We got John in the back and Judy too.
From a literary perspective, it seems to me, I've played around with this idea of
yes?
the Legion connection of the Romans. I had no idea there's so many other connections in there. It seems to me one could just take a political look at this and not you wouldn't even need to have the demons be literal now. This could just be a political parable. And I'm not saying it is. I'm saying one could come with political eyes to this story and say, this isn't about demon possession at all. This is about the Romans controlling everything. And so it's actually a hidden attack on Rome. And after having listened to what you said, it suddenly occurs to me that it might be possible that this is getting written immediately after the fall of Jerusalem. And that this is coded language that, and Jesus is actually being cast in a sense, maybe not a direct sense, but in a sense as a political liberator through this story.
And taking your insights, Jeff, what does it mean that Mark, believing that Jesus is the Christ, what does it mean that Mark equates political Roman oppression with demonic activity? What is he saying? What is he saying? I mean, I almost, there's a part of me that thinks he's being far more radical than we would feel comfortable being. Or at least I would a lot of the time, given what you've said. Please, John. Oh, go ahead, Donna.
I hate to always be the negative voice, but here we go. I think that some, following on what Peter said, we've hung an awful lot on this story. There, first of all, we have demonized the Romans to the point of, I think, to an absurd point. The Romans did not only bring oppression. Maybe it's because I'm half Italian. Got to defend the Romans, right, Tony? But they brought peace, they brought order, they brought a legal system that was at least reliable, if somewhat harsh. They took an area that was full of warring tribes and imposed, at least for a time being, some architectural and legal and structure on an area that heretofore had not known it. And I think in our interpretation, we are idealizing small rural farming as somehow something that has unfortunately been done away with in an age where urbanization is beginning to happen in other areas. Rome is the primary example, but it's elsewhere as well. And with urbanization, you get specialization. So some people are raising pigs, which provides a lot of pork for more people, maybe not just for the elite, but more people get to eat this, ham and eggs.
Yes.
And some other people, meanwhile, are raising wheat, and it also frees another group to paint, or to write, or to do the sorts of things that we think of with an advancing, specializing civilization. So I just wanted to say that it's not all, the pigs are not all bad.
So, important reminders, important to join this conversation, right, of us being thoughtful and thinking this through carefully. Thank you so much. John, please.
I wonder who were the people who came to Jesus to tell him to leave? They were the
We don't know for
people who
sure
had
from the text.
business,
We're not
or
sure from the text for sure.
Some Jewish who want the business,
There are people who live in the community still,
or
and there are
some
people who seem to be
affected.
somehow afraid, given this current situation. Asking him,
the
he's got to
were
go.
affected for losing the business. I asked you this because a few years ago a friend of mine went to Israel, and somehow he heard some noise and bad smell for a pig farm. And he said, "Do you have pig farms here in Israel?" He said, no. They raise and put a podium, and they raise the pigs on the podium, not to touch the
ground.
Yes.
Not in this land.
But not in this land, because this land was, Gentiles land. And it's a possibility that just the Jewish people could be in charge of these farms.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I don't think we know the answer to your question definitively. but we know that there's fear. And I wonder if there's fear because they know Rome's not going to be happy with their food source been wiped out. Judy. Oh, no.
Right here.
A couple more comments, and then I just want to share with you one other passage of Scripture and get your thoughts on it, and then we'll have a benediction. I'm always happy to stay after and talk longer. Please, sir.
So part of the post-colonial perspective in building that
Right.
up was that historically the Romans had moved into this area
Correct.
and taken it over. With this story, then I would be looking for another historical event that they left this area.
Mhm.
That would finish the story and match with this. Did that happen?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that happening anytime soon. I need to go further than the history that I've studied so far, but during Marc's, if we've located Marc correctly, I'm not aware of that happening anytime soon. Thank you for that question. I need to study that more. Please.
You've spoken about that land was dark land or scary land or obviously non-Jewish land.
From the perspective of a Jew
Exactly.
looking at that, yeah.
From our perspective in the end time as we are, how do we look at what we call dark countries? Is this because God has called them dark and so they're this way? We think of the Middle East particularly where we lost our heart. And we've lived in a place in Africa where, spiritism and witch doctors and curses and all of these things were impacting our new church members. And I keep pondering the text, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the people that dwell therein. So those pig keepers and all, including the deranged guy that couldn't be tied up, were certainly under the curse of the devil. But that's true of any continent, including our own, where there's manipulation, where there's oppression, where there's marginalization of people. The land of the east of the Galilee didn't have a monopoly on all that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you've actually taken me back to some of Donna's comments. One of the things that I think is fascinating about the Gospel of Mark is its ever embracing circles of people. And if you'll remember, I think it was our first day together, our first week together, where we noticed that at the end of the Gospel of Mark, who is it that proclaims Jesus as God's Son? It's not the voice breaking through like at the baptism and the transfiguration. Who is it that proclaims Jesus as God's Son? A Roman centurion. So even if there is a critique of Rome, I'm looking at Donna, there is. No. But if there is a critique of Rome going on here, think of how the Romans at some level are also included as part of the family of God, proclaiming Jesus as the Christ. Wonder of wonders. He can do that even with the oppressors, even with the one who nails Jesus to the cross, can become part of the story of the telling. So I'm moved by that. There's no one who's in territory that can't be part of God's land, right? It's not possible. Let me have you listen to this. This is also from the Gospel of Mark. All right, I didn't provide it for you, and you can all, of course, look it up, but I think it'd be fun for you to just listen to it. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They'd been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. And they entered the tomb, and they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side. And they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He's been raised. He's not here. Look, there's the place that they laid him. But go and tell the disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and they fled the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Amen. That's the end of the Gospel of Mark. That's the end of the Gospel of Mark. Did it remind you of any other story in the Gospel of Mark? Tomb, 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 man sitting, dressed, alarm. Go and tell. But they're afraid. I feel like I'm... Is it possible that... If this happens in class, it's an absence. I just want you to know. Okay. Clearly. Just kidding, love you. Do you hear echoes to the Legion story? And if you do, why would Mark want us to be remembering Legion when he comes to the end of his gospel? Why would he be wanting us to remember Legion? Judy.
It's a resurrection.
So, a man with 2,000 demons can be resurrected. And Jesus is resurrected. There's hope for resurrection for anyone. Yes, please.
Many years ago, this reminds me when I used to travel with Charlie Peel in Latin America, and we used to go and visit some of the liberation theology gurus at the time. And of course, liberation is really a key theme in this story, whether it be, various things. And the question that always came up to my mind, and I think when we would visit with these people that were espousing liberation theology, is Jesus calling for us to liberate the systems that we're living in now, which are full of sin and demoniacs and everything, whether it be modern civilization or early? Or is he asking us, telling them, just like the ladies who came to the tomb or the demoniac, what is the solution to this problem? Is it to go out and overthrow the systems and then build our own system? Or is it to bring to these systems the healing that only Jesus can do by going through the heart? And I think Mark kind of leaves it hanging there, and he's just, whether what you just read or the others, he's saying, well, what's the solution? Okay, do we go and throw out the owners of the pigs and then reinstate the lawful owners and try to reinstate the system, and then we become the controllers? Or do you change yourself, and then through that we change the system? And I never got a good answer to that over the years, that we would confront people that are facing these systems. What's your suggestion?
Well, I believe, I think I know what Charles Teal would say.
I know.
So if you're asking that question, I feel pretty confident.
Yeah.
Given his, of this narrative and this story, and what is it compelling us to do? And let me just, and I know it's time for us to conclude, so I thank you for your challenging question that I hope we all keep as we leave here today, not only about this story, but the whole Gospel of Mark. But I would just note this. At the end of the Gospel of Mark, it says, go and tell, and it leaves us hanging, like you said. But if we are to sort of catch the echo of chapter 5, what happened at the end of chapter 5? Jesus said the same thing, right? Go and tell. And what happened? What happened?
Man went back.
He did.
He went.
He did. He went all throughout the Decapolis telling, right? Sharing the good news of a liberating Jesus. So if that's the end of chapter 5's story, and if I'm supposed to, when I get to the end of chapter 16, remember that echo, it seems to me there's an invitation to everyone who concludes the Gospel of Mark. And I thank you very much for this exciting conversation today and these last 5 weeks. I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Kendra, for the last 5 weeks. Now that we've totally exhausted Mark. Greatly appreciate the perspective, and you can just see great literature here as well. It's, things intertwined with and intertwined. So thank you again for being with us. Next week, we're going to take a look at Elder Tom Lemon's paper. David Larson will be here to present that. And then we're going to go into Martin Luther, the 500th anniversary of that. By the way, just want to again mention, we have lots of people that watch this. I just saw the hits for Dr. Johnson's was almost 2,000 hits for his presentation. So we appreciate what you folks do here. We appreciate what Alan does and Laura and all the others to make this thing possible. So at this time, oh, thank you. I should have this memorized by now. Okay. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. Okay, thank you. See you next week.
Very good.